Hi everyone, I'm Audrey Odwuor and I'm a member of CLEAN at UCI, which is a group that comes together to bring you presentations and activities on different parts of the Earth system. Now unfortunately, since we can't be there with you in person today to give this lecture and to do these activities, before we get started talking about the carbon cycle, I'm going to show you a video introduction of all of the members of the CLEAN team that have made today's presentation and activities possible.
Hi everyone, my name is John Powers and I'm a grad student at UC Irvine. I'm in 21st grade and I work on flower smells in Hawaii. And today we'll be talking to you about the carbon cycle.
Hi everyone, good to see you, sort of. My name's Shane. I'm a third year grad student at UC Irvine in the Department of Earth System Science, and I study the carbon cycle and wildfires and California ecosystems.
Hi everyone, I'm Audrey. I'm a second year grad student here in the Department of Earth System Science with Shane, and I also study wildfires, and I mainly think about fires and deforestation in the Amazon.
Hi everyone, I'm Elizabeth. I'm also a graduate student in the Earth System Science Department. Some of you might recognize me from the paleoclimate lesson, which is what I study, so I use stalagmites from caves to reconstruct past climate.
Hi everyone, I'm Andy. I'm a second year graduate student in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, and I study microorganisms in soil.
Hi everyone, I'm Wenshen. I'm a postdoc from Earth System Science. I stopped counting my grades a long time ago. I study clouds and snow in the far, far North Arctic. I use automatic weather stations and satellite data.
And I'm Carl. I'm a graduate student at UCI too. I'm in 18th grade and I study trees and how they die in California.
So now that we've gotten to meet everyone, we're going to get started talking about the carbon cycle. And we'll first ask, what is carbon? Some of you might remember from CLEAN's greenhouse gas lecture last fall that carbon is present in chemicals like carbon dioxide and methane, which are both greenhouse gases. But carbon itself is an element, which we can see in the periodic table of the elements. And an element is basically a building block for other chemicals. Now, carbon specifically is a building block for life, and we can understand that a little bit better if we go through this diagram here, starting at the top with photosynthesis. So during photosynthesis, plants take in carbon dioxide and water from the atmosphere and use energy from the sun to make sugar or glucose. And glucose or sugar is another carbon-containing compound. So it's not carbon dioxide, but it still has carbon in it. And during this process, plants also release a little bit of oxygen into the atmosphere. Now, organisms like this cow can eat grass, which underwent photosynthesis, to get that sugar or that glucose, and it burns this sugar to produce energy. However, not all of this sugar gets burned and turned into energy. Some of it gets breathed back out as carbon dioxide, and the organisms will also breathe out a little bit of water vapor, which allows the plants to undergo photosynthesis again and keep this cycle going. That process where the animals and the other organisms eat this glucose, burn it for energy, and breathe some of it back out is called cellular respiration. Now here's a picture of John eating some ice cream. So John is eating this ice cream, which is made with milk, which came from a cow, which ate this grass, which underwent photosynthesis. So John is getting his energy essentially from this plant that turned carbon dioxide into sugar. So this sugar is being burned so that he can have some energy, but he's also breathing some of it back out as carbon dioxide, and that's cellular respiration. And another way to look at that is by using this diagram, where on the left-hand side we have the inputs for photosynthesis, or carbon dioxide, water, and energy from the sun, and on the right-hand side we have the outputs of photosynthesis, glucose, which is a kind of sugar, and oxygen. So it's important to remember that during photosynthesis, plants actually release a little bit of oxygen. So this goes into the atmosphere, and then we can breathe it in. We also have cellular respiration, where organisms eat those sugars from plants and get some energy from it. But not all of that carbon or that sugar gets burned and turned into energy. Some of it gets released back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide when we breathe. And scientists describe these processes of photosynthesis and cellular respiration using this chemical equation, which might not look like the equations you've seen before that have an equal sign in them. Chemical equations have arrows instead, and for this specific equation, the arrow has two ends to show that the reactions happen back and forth. So the reactions for photosynthesis, where plants take in carbon dioxide, water, and energy, happen back and forth with the reactions for cellular respiration, where organisms burn glucose and then release some of it back as carbon dioxide. Now, these processes help make the carbon that sustains life. And to sustain life, carbon has to move around through different environments. So let's first talk about how it moves through the ocean. We have carbon dioxide from the atmosphere that gets dissolved in water, in the seawater, and phytoplankton, which we can kind of think of as plants underwater, take in this carbon dioxide to produce sugars during photosynthesis. So these phytoplankton get eaten by bigger organisms like zooplankton, which get eaten by even bigger organisms like fish or their predators. So whenever these organisms eat these sugars from the phytoplankton, like we talked about, they're going to breathe some of it back out as carbon dioxide, so that gets released into the atmosphere. Also, when these organisms die, they get broken down by bacteria in the ocean, which releases some of that carbon that they're made up of as organic carbon into the ocean. Some of it gets buried on the ocean floor, and some of it gets mixed with other nutrients in the ocean so that phytoplankton can keep carrying out photosynthesis. Here's a video showing what happens when carbon dioxide gets dissolved in the ocean. So we can see these, and we also have some bubbles being produced. So these bubbles are the result of those plants releasing oxygen as they're undergoing photosynthesis. And this is going to be important for your activity later on. So we've seen what it looks like when carbon dioxide dissolves in water, but then what does that mean for other organisms in water? We can think of the carbon dioxide in water kind of like the fizz in soda, and carbon dioxide is actually responsible for that fizziness or that bubbliness of soda. So carbon dioxide goes into the ocean from the atmosphere, and it dissolves in the water, which makes the water more acidic, which then dissolves these skeletons of corals and other things like shells that are made of calcium carbonate. So you might have heard of this when people talk about coral bleaching or ocean acidification. So that's kind of the result of putting too much carbon dioxide into the ocean. Now let's talk about the land. Carbon also has to move throughout the land to be able to sustain life. So at the top of the diagram, we have photosynthesis, like we talked about. So these plants take in carbon dioxide to make sugars. Organisms like humans and cows eat these sugars and breathe some of that carbon back out as CO2. Now, some of these sugars, or some of this organic matter that the plant makes, doesn't get eaten, and it actually goes into the soil, where it can be broken down by bacteria. And as these bacteria break down this carbon, they release some of it back into the atmosphere. And then, more of this organic carbon can make it all the way down to the bedrock, where it gets turned into fossil fuels. And this takes a really, really long time, but once it happens, humans can extract these fossil fuels up to the surface and burn them for energy, which produces things like CO2 and methane, or some of the greenhouse gases that you're probably familiar with. Now this slide shows the carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere over time. So on the y-axis we have the actual carbon dioxide concentration, and on the x-axis we have time. So on the left we can see we go all the way back to about 800,000 years ago, and on the right-hand side we're closer to present day. So the carbon dioxide concentrations, which you can see in these squiggly lines, have gone up and down throughout time, but they've kind of always gone up to the same point and come back down to the same point. But that changed closer to present day when carbon dioxide concentrations went up and kept going up and are actually still going up. So a lot of this is the result of humans burning those fossil fuels that we talked about. That is a part of the carbon cycle, but it's not quite a natural part. It's a part that humans have added. So we're putting more carbon into the atmosphere than the rest of the carbon cycle can take care of. So carbon dioxide concentrations have been going up. You can see what the carbon dioxide concentration was in 1950 and also what it is at present day. And here's another arrow to show you what it was 12 years ago, which is probably around the time that you all were born. We call this the hockey stick curve because the very end of the graph, close to present day, where carbon dioxide concentrations keep going up, kind of looks like a hockey stick. Now that we've talked about the carbon cycle and photosynthesis and respiration, you're going to get to do a lab activity where you actually get to see photosynthesis happening. You're going to have these Alodia plants, some baking soda or sodium bicarbonate, and a lamp. So we've talked about the fact that plants need carbon dioxide and energy from the sun or light to do photosynthesis. So that's why we have these materials on the left-hand side of this slide. Now your plant is going to be fed with this baking soda, and you're going to give it some light so that you can see photosynthesis happening. And the way you see photosynthesis happening, like we saw on the slide where you can see the bubbles underwater, is by counting bubbles. So the more bubbles that are produced, the more oxygen is being released, and the more photosynthesis is happening. After doing your experiment, you're going to record your data on a graph that looks like this. On the y-axis, you have the number of bubbles for 2 minutes, which, again, like I said, bubbles represent how much photosynthesis is happening. And then each different bar on this graph represents a different treatment or a different part of the experiment. Near means that it was near the lamp. Near plus SB means that it was near the lamp and you also added sodium bicarbonate or baking soda. And far plus SB means that it was far from the lamp, but you also added baking soda. So John is going to do this lab with you. I'm going to leave you here so that you can get started on the activity and hopefully get to observe photosynthesis for yourself.
Have you ever wondered where photosynthesis happens or why plants are green? Inside every plant cell, there are about 100 chloroplasts the size of bacteria, only 1 micron wide or a millionth of a meter. These chloroplasts contain green pigments called chlorophylls that catch sunlight so that plants can use that energy for photosynthesis. Today we're going to try to speed up and slow down photosynthesis. As you learned from Audrey, plants play an important role in the global carbon cycle that affects our climate. Plants take up carbon dioxide and use the light energy of the sun to turn it into a sugar that they use to grow and a waste gas, oxygen. You know that you need oxygen to breathe, but plants just try to get rid of it. The faster they do photosynthesis, the faster they make oxygen, and they are constantly releasing it into the air we breathe. Take a deep breath. You're breathing in what plants are breathing out. Oxygen is clear and colorless, and you can't smell it. What can we do to be able to see the oxygen that plants produce? Fortunately for us, some land plants have evolved to live under the water. You might find these plants growing in a pond or a creek, or in the aquarium aisle of your local pet store. When they photosynthesize, the waste oxygen forms bubbles on the surface of the plant, and these bubble to the surface. The faster the plants photosynthesize, the faster the bubbles come out. So, we can directly measure how fast plants are capturing carbon dioxide from the water by counting the bubbles of oxygen waste gas that they produce. Based on what you learned, what are some things that would speed up or slow down photosynthesis? Photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide, light, and water. So in general, the more of each that is available, the faster photosynthesis will run. In our experiment, we are going to vary the amount of light and the amount of carbon dioxide to see what happens to photosynthesis. We are going to use sodium bicarbonate, also known as baking soda, to make more carbon dioxide available for the plant. When you add baking soda to water, some of it gets turned into dissolved carbon dioxide. Then to change the amount of light, we can just move a lamp closer or farther away. The first step in this experiment is to gather all of the materials. We will need a water plant, a test tube, a lamp, a timer, and baking soda. First, we need to cut the stem of the water plant so that it fits in the test tube. Then we fill the test tube with water. Push the plant stem end up into the tube. Put the test tube next to the lamp. We will have 3 treatments for this lab. Treatments are the different conditions that you change in order to see what happens to the thing you are measuring, which in this experiment is the number of bubbles you count in 2 minutes. The first treatment will be putting the lamp 5 centimeters away from the plant. We will call this our near treatment. Go ahead and count the number of bubbles that you see in 2 minutes. Great job! Make sure to write down the number of bubbles you saw for the near treatment. The second treatment will still have the lamp near the plant, but we will add sodium bicarbonate to give the plant more carbon dioxide. Now count the number of bubbles that you see in 2 minutes. Good job! Make sure to write down the number of bubbles you saw for the near with sodium bicarbonate treatment. For the last treatment, there is still sodium bicarbonate in the water, but now we are going to pull the lamp away to 20 centimeters to make the light dimmer. This will be our FAR with sodium bicarbonate treatment. Count the number of bubbles that you see in 2 minutes. Great job! Make sure to write down the number of bubbles you saw for the FAR with sodium bicarbonate treatment. That's the whole experiment. The next step is to send us your data. Fill out the worksheet in Google Forms with your numbers and answers to some questions. We also want to hear from you. We will be making another video to answer any questions you have about the experiment, the carbon cycle, or what life as a scientist is like. Thanks for watching.